Hello everyone and welcome to episode 57 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we're going to be discussing some bench press tips. Now as you probably already know, this is probably the most commonly performed exercise within every single gym. However, it's also the exercise that's performed more incorrectly than probably any other exercise. So really going to be diving deep into the technique, and also likewise last week when I was discussing the deadlift tips, there's going to be a few cues here that aren't really visible to the naked eye, but I can promise you are going to make a huge difference. Likewise last week when I was discussing about bracing your core effectively, trying to drive your feet through the floor, there's going to be some similar cues in today's lesson which aren't necessarily visible to the naked eye, but as I said, make a huge difference to your strength, your power, how stable you are throughout the bench press movement. Let's first of all start with the setup, and the setup without question is arguably one of the most important factors. Likewise the deadlift, likewise with the squat. If you don't have the proper setup, it's very difficult to perform this exercise properly and safely. Now for those of you who play golf, you know how important the setup is. Without a very solid setup, it's very difficult to hit golf balls well, and the same goes for the bench press. Not got a proper setup, you're not going to perform the exercise correctly. First we're going to be discussing feet position. Now for whatever reason, whenever I see the majority of people bench pressing, they have a tendency to be lazy with their feet. In their heads, I think they probably think that the legs don't have an important role within the bench press, but they absolutely do. They provide a stable base, they can help provide power as well, and this is going to translate to a stronger bench press. So what you'll see most people doing is just being lazy with their feet, not really planting their feet, not really being in a stable position. Their feet are basically all over the place. However, one of the things I want you to focus on is trying to bring your feet underneath the bench. You're really focusing on trying to drive your feet back behind your glutes basically. So imagine that feet position now. From there you're almost going to turn your toes outwards. So now you've got the feet more underneath you, you're turning your toes outwards as far as possible. So you want to be in the position where your legs are very fixed and braced. If someone were to tap your quads, for example, they'd be extremely tight because you've got those feet as far underneath as possible, toes are pointing outwards. Now from here there's a couple of different schools of thought. I personally like to have my heels planted on the floor. However, there's certain powerlifters that like to have their heels elevated. Choose one or the other. My personal preference for most people is to initially start with your heels on the floor. However, play around with both. The key thing with this is, with regards to every single cue we'll be discussing in today's episode, is to make sure there's no lack of tightness within the body. If there's any lack of tightness anywhere within the body, we're going to lose power. So we basically want the tightest position possible. Secondly, we're really wanting to focus on actually squeezing your glutes together, and this will pretty much happen by default once you've got the feet more underneath you. But from here, really focus on squeezing those glutes, and that's going to again create more of a stable base. Thirdly, I want you to have a slight arch in your lower back. Now this is for a couple of reasons. One of them is just general safety. You'll notice most people have a tendency to just have a flat back, and the problem with this is the shoulders will therefore have a tendency to overtake the chest within the movement. This can therefore mean lack of strength, but also this can cause some shoulder problems. You want to have a slight arch in that lower back. This is also going to keep the chest higher, and as a result, we'll have more of the prime move of the chest engaging in the movement. Additionally, because our chest is higher, the bar is actually going to have less distance to travel, and as a result we can therefore move heavier loads and will be in more of a powerful position. So once you've got the arch in the lower back or slight arch, you're going to have your chest up. It's a similar thing. As soon as you arch your back, your chest should be high, but focus on, more importantly, pulling them shoulders back. So instead of just thinking chest up, pull them shoulder blades back. You almost want to feel like them rear delts are being driven into the bench. Now from here we're going to unrack the weight. With regards to hand position, this is going to be largely down to personal preference and also limb length, but For most people, I like to have them just inside the Olympic bar line. So if you use Olympic bar, which should be within most gyms, you'll have the Olympic bar lines. I like to be just inside that, so my little finger will be just inside that on both sides. You really want to be in a position where at the bottom of the bench press there's a right angle at the elbow joint. If your hands are too wide, you won't have that 90 angle. If your hands are too close, you won't have that 90 angle either. So play around with that, focus on that 90 angle at the elbow joint at the bottom of each rep. Second thing we're also focusing as well is actually driving our feet through the floor. So now we've got our feet in more of a stable position, we're now going to focus on actually driving our feet through the floor. And this is really going to help create more of a stable base and again make you more powerful. Most people have a tendency, like I said, to be lazy with their feet, and also they shuffle their feet. Again, if there's lack of tightness, there's going to be lack of power. So notice the common theme here, we're focusing on tightness, so we're in the most powerful position possible. Again, we're actually focusing on squeezing the glutes throughout the movement. Additionally, I want you to focus on having a big deep breath before unloading the bar. Same as we did with the deadlift, and also do a squat tutorial podcast as well. Focus on that big deep breath, and you're going to hold that position until you've completed each rep. And then you're going to actually focus on lowering the bar to the nipple line, or even just lower than that. So most people have a tendency to bench press too high on the chest. You want to be much lower, just because you're more powerful, one, but two, is keeping your shoulders in a more safer position. So if you have flared elbows and the bar's much higher, you're going to potentially have some shoulder injuries. Next thing is to focus on tucking them elbows slightly. Again, like I said, most people have a tendency to flare the elbows, and this can potentially cause some shoulder injuries, and again, you're not in the most powerful position. Focus on pulling the shoulder blades back like I mentioned before. And here's the most important cue. Likewise, what I was discussing last week in terms of the hidden cues that aren't visible but that make a huge difference, what I want you to focus on doing is, instead of focusing on pushing the bar away from you, you're actually going to do the opposite. You're going to focus on pushing your back through the bench. You're going to focus on pushing those lats, those rhomboids through the bench. This is going to help create a much more tighter, more powerful position. Notice the theme again, the tightness. So instead of focusing on pushing the bar forward, you're focusing on driving the back throughout the bench. And just practice this now while you're listening to this. Instead of pushing, focus actually on pushing back through the bench. You can just feel the tightness across the upper back, and that's going to make for a much stronger bench press. Final thing, focus on that straight bar path. You'll see so many people that waste a lot of energy because it's not a straight bar path. Make sure you're focusing on the exact same bar path every single rep, and this will make for a stronger bench press. Like I said, the whole theme with this podcast was to focus on tightness, which therefore translates into a safer bench press, a more powerful and stronger bench press as well. So hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you can start applying these tips immediately. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, you go to Layton, Layton fitness.co.uk. You'll see a tab at the top of the page, and you can therefore download that immediately. Additionally, listen to all our other podcast episodes. I've also got over 100 videos on my website, and you can also learn more about myself and some of the products and services I have available as well on the website. Thank you very much. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care.